The name of our state, Wisconsin, came from the native people who lived on this land for centuries and who still live here today. They shaped Wisconsin as we know it. But how much do we know about the history of the native people and nations of Wisconsin and how they continue to influence what happens in our state today? Here to help us learn more is Dr. Patty Loew, a journalist and professor emerita at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. She is also the author of several books about Wisconsin's native people, including Indian Nations of Wisconsin, Histories of Endurance and Renewal. Its third edition is scheduled for publication next year. She is also a citizen of the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Ojibwa. Welcome, Dr. Loew, and thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Denise. It's a pleasure to be here.
You are a journalist and a storyteller at heart. What was it that motivated you to write your most recent book that's going into its third edition and to tell the stories that are contained in it about Wisconsin's Indian nations?
You know, it really began at the Wisconsin sesquicentennial when the state was making plans to celebrate its 150 years of statehood, and there was this conspicuous absence of anything native. And at the last minute, the powers that be kind of responded to some of that pressure and said, oh, well, we better include the native people in this. And I was asked to help create an outdoor walk-through public history display. And that got me into the 12 native communities and the urban communities in Wisconsin. And I realized there was such a rich history. And I was in graduate school at the time and was doing a lot of work in the Wisconsin Historical Society archives. And it has one of the largest collections of native books outside the Library of Congress. And yet 99% or more were histories that were written by government officials, missionaries, trappers, traders. These were histories of native people written by non-native people whose lives intersected with Indians. And really, they were better histories of those people than they were of our people. And that really motivated me to write a history that reflected the past as native people reconstructed it.
What did you learn when you were writing this book?
Well, what I learned was that I have a really colonized mind because I came out of a traditional history program in college. And so history, the way it's taught in higher education, is linear. You pick a starting point, you pick an ending point, and you sort of plug in all the names and dates and facts along that line. And what I learned in Native communities is that that's not the way Native people think about the past. For Native people, it's about place, it's spatial, and everything worth remembering is remembered around, so it sort of radiates out. Law, politics, history, ritual, education, everything radiates from that place. And that was a really difficult concept for me to get my head around.
When people read your books, and particularly this book on the history of Indian nations in Wisconsin, what do you want them to walk away with? What understanding do you want them to walk away with?
That's a really great question, and a question you always get asked in graduate school when you're writing a scholarly book. For me, I think it's that sense of place that Native people don't think in linear terms. And so concepts like, years and dates and decades are not as important as it was a long time ago and it's now embedded in our understanding of who we are. The other thing that I really wanted people to understand is that Native people are not relics. We don't exist in the past. We're dynamic communities that are constantly evolving. And yes, we've had trauma in the past. Generational trauma is a real thing. Boarding schools, for example, missing and murdered, Native women. All of that is true and are stories that need to be told. But that's only part of the story. Native people didn't survived because of generational trauma. We survived because of generational innovation and joy and creativity. And those are stories that need to be told as well. So if you're a journalist, yes, tell me about boarding schools and about the cemeteries and why children died in them, but also pull it forward and explain what Native education looks when Native people themselves are in charge of it.
One thing that tends to happen too, I think, with traditional tellings of history is that the story of Wisconsin's Indian nations is told as if it's a monolithic history, and it doesn't recognize that there are different histories for each of the 12 nations that exist.
Denise, that's so important. And I should have included that in my little bullet point of what I wanted people to get out of this. And that's why, my book really was the first book that was organized in a way where each nation had its own chapter in order to reinforce the notion that Native people are not monolithic, that we have different languages, different cultures, different religions, different spiritual traditions, and that there's great diversity in Native communities. So I'm really glad you pointed that out.
One thing that people also tend to think about history is being something that is ancient in the past. Your book really brings people up to the present and talks about that recent history that has been created. Why was that something that was important to do?
Well, again, I don't want people to think of Native people in the past tense. You can go to almost any natural history museum in the country, although I hope it's changing a bit. And you see the displays with the placards next to it, the explanatory text, and you see so much information delivered in the past tense. We're dynamic people, and I think that's really important to remember that Native people are dynamic.
What do you want people along those lines to understand about the history of Wisconsin's Indian nations that is still being written today?
Mm. Well, I think it's interesting to me to think about the very early days when, we tend to think that European settlers came over and assimilated Indians, and actually in the early days it was the other way around. We had more of a French presence. The French fur trade was a really important part of our history, and the French learned our language. They adopted our modes of transportation. They, paddled around in canoes. They wore our clothing. They married into our families. And so it wasn't the case of an oppressive outer culture imposing itself on Native people. We helped shape the current of events and traditions in this state, and they're still present today. You see, we're still maple syruping, as are non-Native people. Fishing, gardening, all those things we helped shape the way they're done in the state today. One of the things that was really exciting to me as I began work on this most recent chapter is to see all the food sovereignty programs in Native communities and this return to our traditional foods. We have communities that are disproportionately hit by diabetes and heart disease. And part of that is the colonized diet that we've been adopting over the past couple hundred years. There's a real effort to go back to our traditional foods and get ourselves healthy again. The expansion of fish hatcheries, that was another real eye-opener. Every community in Wisconsin, every Native community in the Ojibwe world, it has really dynamic fish hatcheries, and they're replenishing the fish, not just for the lakes within our reservations, but throughout northern Wisconsin in the ceded territory.
There is so much good information that you've shared with us today, and even more good information in all of your books. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Loew.
Thank you so much, Denise. It was a pleasure.
And you can order any of Dr. Loew's books from the Wisconsin Historical Society at wisconsinhistory.org. We're right back.